I used to go around museums with my father. From that I got a sense of history, a sense of the past. I had no real feeling for pottery as such, but just a feeling for old things to begin with. By the time I was around 14, I was beginning to pick up bits of pottery and try and fit them into history. At that time I joined the local history society and went digging, dug out bits and pieces under the instruction of an old chap. I went when I was 16 to art school. I had to choose a craft to do on Fridays, and the one that lit up in neon lights on the page was pottery. For some reason I knew I had to do it, that there was the fascination, there was a link somehow. And I spent the first term making a coil pot, and the second term making a pressed dish. The third term we went on the wheel, and that was the bit I've been waiting for. It was mud spinning, as the painters used to call it. And I realised then that that was what I wanted to do most. I like all the pots to be useful. I like to feel that I'm making functional things that people can actually use. But when I was making things that weren't entirely useful, people would say, "That's super, I really like that, now, but what's it for?" It's not that I feel I've got to satisfy people and say, well, yes, it's got a function, but I really feel there was something fundamental about that question in relation to the particular things I was making then. Because they were thrown pots, or thrown objects, and I think throwing, because of its association over centuries with useful objects, throws that question up much more readily than a hand-built piece. So, as a thrower, I think of myself as a thrower first and foremost, and I ought to be making useful things. And not only ought to, but I know that I enjoy that most. I enjoy making useful pots. The idea of the land was to be a sort of a buffer against the world, but once we arrived here we realised that the land was something more than that we had a kind of responsibility, and that without animals grazing the fields, then the fields would deteriorate. We bought a cow. The cow produced milk, so you had to feed calves, you could bottle feed lambs, and within a very short space of time we were snowed under with all sorts of farm work. But I think it's time to cut down on it, and I think we've learnt enough now to be able to use the land sensibly without it encroaching on other aspects of our lives too much. I'm conscious of being at work all the time. Even in the evenings when I, in theory, have finished working, I'm still working in my mind. I'm still thinking about the next day's work, or what I should be doing now if I wasn't sitting eating a meal with the family. I think the children find it a bit puzzling at times that I don't actually sit down and watch the television as much as most fathers do, and that I don't get involved in leisure activities in the same way as other people do. To me, a leisure activity is going and fixing a fence or doing some hedging, and making pots is the serious business that I really want to be doing most of the time anyway. The most exciting part of the work is throwing the pots. I think that's the truly creative bit. It's initiating, it's inventing. The reaction between me and the clay. The fact that the clay is rotating on the wheel, the texture of the clay, the amount of water I use with it, whether it's slipping easily through my fingers or whether I'm dragging at all against it and tearing it up, whether you're trying to put a tautness or a looseness into the quality of the form. That's the most exciting part, the bit where you really feel that something's happening under your fingers, something's alive there. Often you're striving to achieve an idea that's really rather vague. You've got a slight notion of a quality of form or a surface, maybe a fineness of edge or something that you want to achieve, and you sit on the wheel and you work towards that, stage by stage, eliminating one pot after another, feeling that you're maybe getting closer or then farther from the idea, until in the end you make something that satisfies you. It may not be quite what you thought you were going to make, but nevertheless it's something that has grown out of a dialogue between you and the material and the process. I find that sometimes if the idea is very strong, that if maybe I've thought the thing out too thoroughly beforehand, that it just doesn't work so well, because there's less reason for doing it then. If you're working almost to a blueprint, if the idea is as specific as that, then perhaps the life goes out of it because it's not as inventive as it could be. To make one good pot, to end up with one good pot, means that you've made dozens of pots that were potentially good, but which for some reason didn't come off. I don't think I'd ever want to be without some teaching. I enjoy teaching. I like the contact with other people. I enjoy the whole idea of education, because I think that a college is a place where people develop in all sorts of ways. They don't just learn a skill. The teaching's valuable to me as a source of communication. I think it's very testing to have to pass on your skills, for instance. It's also good to have other people questioning your ideas, testing your validity in a way. I don't think students are ever tempted to cut you down because you're a teacher, but because of their curiosity and because of their eagerness to develop themselves and to find their own skills and their own potential, they're constantly questioning you. I think that if you're going to talk to other people about their work, you're going to talk to them about your own work too, then you've got to come to terms with what you're doing and try to understand what you're doing and try to put what you're doing into some sort of broader context. And I find that a very valuable thing. Often I get into a rhythm of work and I really want to carry on making because I've got ideas flowing in a particularly sort of fluent way, and I feel it's good to be working. But I can't go on any longer simply because there's no room to put any more pots down. So I'm forced to have a firing at that point. Each pot has to have little wads of alumina and china clay attached to it so that it doesn't stick to the kiln shell. So it's a very slow, tedious business packing the kiln. There are all sorts of chores involved. The fuel has to be sorted out. I use reclaimed oil, old engine oil, as part of my fuel. It has to be dealt with, mixed with thinner oil to make it go through the burners. The kiln constantly deteriorates with salt glaze, so that, the first job is really to check the kiln, repair any bits that are melting, patch up any loose bits and so on. The same with the kiln furniture, that has to be checked over. The burners have to be checked and the jets cleared if necessary. And the whole process takes probably 2 days. Until the pots have been fired, they're just lumps of clay. It's not pottery at all. You can't pick a pot up by its handle, for instance, with any confidence when it's raw. You can have no idea of its true quality as a piece of pottery. It's like a piece of papier-mâché or a chocolate egg. It's got no more substance than that. And it's only when it comes out of the kiln fired that you really know what you've made. One of the attractions of salt glaze is the uncertainty, because you know that it's possible to get marvellous results. Before you start a firing, you make theories about how you're going to get those marvellous results. You base that on your past experiences. The thing that's most vivid is the last firing. And often after a firing I'll make notes about what happened and perhaps what I should do next time. Once the burners are turned on, it's curtain up almost. It's really exciting. It's definitely like alchemy. There's a certain feeling of magic about it that you honestly don't know what's really going on in there. You speculate, you make theories, but you've no tangible evidence of what goes on inside the kiln. I think those very elements of uncertainty are the things that make me go on doing it. It's the fact that you don't really know what's going to happen, but you hope for the really marvellous things that can happen that makes you want to do it again. Although maybe the last firing was a disaster. You can have bad firings in succession and you get very depressed at that point. Then, miraculously, you'll have a good one, or maybe just one or two pots in the firing were good. And that's enough to spur you on. You know that it's possible. You've just your senses to tell you that all that noise, all that glare, all the heat that's coming off is an indication of what's going on inside, and you hope that your instincts are right and that your accumulated knowledge is true, and that you can actually get close to what you wanted from that firing. Once you've taken the first few bricks down, you get an indication of how the whole thing's gone. You know whether there's been a major disaster or not. I never opened the kiln on my own, partly because my wife is always keen to be there. She's as curious as I am about the results. In fact, she often takes me there and says, "Come on, we can open it now." And that's a marvellous bit, really. I mean, there's the sort of slight butterflies, because you think, well, maybe it's not going to be very good. But I always think of those stories of the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb, and breaking the seals and taking down the bricks and shining a torch in, and there are the treasures inside. I mean, the treasures don't compare in my case, but the feeling's the same, the feeling that you're going to see something that's never been seen before. You're expecting all sorts of hidden disasters, like the pots that damp, the pots that crack in cooling. But it's the occasional pot that really surprises you, a pot that you didn't really have much hope for. Maybe something that you just put in to fill a corner. Comes out in a surprising way. It may not even be that it's got a good glaze on it, or that it's got a lovely quality and colour, but there's just something about its presence once it's fired that makes it come alive. I'm not really a very single-minded person. I mean, there are all sorts of things I'd like to do besides making pots. I'd like to cast metal. I'd like to blow glass. I'd like to be a gardener. But I've only got one lifetime, and it seems better to stay on the wheel and learn to do it really well.